After running Docker compose down v and up d, all user accounts vanished, select count, from users returned 0. The team spent hours debugging migrations and logs, but the root cause was simple. The v flag deleted the Postgres volume, wiping 3 days of data. Here's exactly why. Welcome to TheCodeForge. Before we dig into that production issue, let's cover Docker volumes networking. Welcome. Today we're diving into Docker volumes and networking, the two pillars of running stateful containers in production. By the end, you'll understand why your data disappears and how to fix it. Containers are ephemeral, their writable layer is deleted on Docker RM. Volumes solve this by storing data outside the container lifecycle. Networks solve connectivity. Containers need to find each other by name, not by dynamic IP. In production, you need both working together. When Docker builds a container, it adds a thin writable layer on top of the image's read-only layers. Every file you create lives there. The second you run Docker RM, that layer is deleted permanently. Volumes fix this by storing data on the host, independent of the container. Here's how to create a named volume and mount it to Postgres. The volume is managed by Docker. You don't need to know the host path. The v flag maps the volume name to the container's data directory. We write data, then completely delete the container. When we start a brand new container with the same volume, the data is still there. This is the power of named volumes. They survive container recreation. Backing up a named volume is straightforward. Run a temporary container that mounts the volume and creates a tar archive. Restore by extracting the backup into the volume while the container is stopped. Choose your volume type based on use case. Named volumes are the production default. Docker manages the path and permissions. Bind mounts map exact host paths, great for development. TMPFS stores data in memory only, perfect for secrets. By default, every container gets its own network namespace. The default bridge network has a nasty limitation. Containers can talk by IP, but not by name. IPs change on restart, so hard-coding IPs is a recipe for 3 AM incidents. The fix is a user-defined bridge network with embedded DNS. Create a user-defined bridge network with Docker Network Create. Then start containers on that network. Notice the API container uses Redis cache as the hostname. Docker DNS resolves it automatically. No IPs needed. From inside the API container, we can ping Redis cache by name. Docker's embedded DNS resolves it to the container's IP. The network inspect shows both containers connected with their IPs. Network isolation is a security feature. A front-end container on a different network cannot reach the Redis cache. You must explicitly connect it to both networks using Docker Network Connect. This limits the blast radius if a container is compromised. This is the same issue we highlighted at the start. Here's exactly why that happened. The developer used a bind mount, vhost/path/var/lib/postgresql/data, instead of a named volume. The host path was empty, maybe it was cleaned up or never existed. Docker created an empty directory, Postgres initialized a fresh database, and the old data was orphaned on the host but no longer mounted. The container saw an empty directory. The fix is simple. Always use named volumes for production databases. Instead of vhost/path/data, use vPostgresData/data. Docker manages the storage path, and the volume persists across container deletions. Before restarting containers, verify volume mounts with Docker Volume Inspect. This is the exact mistake from the incident. A bind mount to a host path that is empty or gets cleaned up will cause Postgres to initialize a fresh database, losing all previous data. Always use named volumes for databases. The default bridge network has no DNS resolution. Containers on it can only reach each other by IP, which changes on restart. If your API tries to connect to DB, it will fail with could not translate host name. Always create a user-defined network. Depends on, without condition. Service healthy only waits for the container to start, not for the process inside to be ready. Postgres takes seconds to initialize. Your API will crash with connection refused. Always add a health check and use condition, service healthy. When moving from a single host Docker setup to Docker Swarm, named volumes using the local driver are not available on other nodes. If the database container is rescheduled to a different node, it starts with an empty data directory. The fix is to use a multi-host volume driver like Rixray or Portworx, or an NFS mount, so volumes are accessible from any node. The default bridge network does not have an embedded DNS resolver. Containers on the default bridge can only reach each other by IP, which changes on restart. This is a frequent source of confusion. Always create a user-defined bridge network for any multi-container stack to enable DNS-based service discovery. The article mentions health checks, but does not show a concrete example. Here is a complete health check for Postgres using PG-ISReady that ensures the database is accepting connections before dependent containers start. To debug volume issues, list volumes and inspect their mount point. For networking, inspect the network to see which containers are connected. Test DNS resolution from inside a container using enslookup or ping. Let's run through some common interview questions. What is the difference between a named volume and a bind mount? Named volumes are managed by Docker. Bind mounts map a specific host path. How does Docker DNS work on user-defined networks? Docker runs an internal DNS resolver that resolves container names to IPs. What is the purpose of depends on with condition? Service healthy? It waits for the service to pass a health check before starting dependent containers. And a few frequently asked questions. Can I use a bind mount for a production database? No, always use a named volume to avoid data loss on host path issues. Why can't my containers reach each other by name? They are likely on the default bridge network. Switch to a user-defined network. How do I back up a named volume? Run a temporary container that mounts the volume and creates a tar archive. To recap, always use named volumes for stateful services, create user-defined networks for DNS-based service discovery, and combine health checks with depends on to handle startup order. These patterns will save you from data loss and connectivity issues in production. Ready to go deeper? Up next, Docker Compose, then Docker Registry and Docker Hub, then Docker Security Best Practices. Find them all at TheCodeForge.io. Thanks for watching. The full article and code examples are covered in detail at TheCodeForge.io.